Imagine the world in 1200 BCE. The Bronze Age is collapsing, kingdoms are falling, and once great cities are burning. Trade networks that had connected the Mediterranean for centuries are breaking apart. Among the survivors are the Phoenicians, master sailors from the eastern Mediterranean. Their cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblus, are squeezed between war, famine, and invaders. So a bold idea emerges: leave everything behind and sail west to find a new beginning. By 814 BCE, according to ancient tradition, a fleet of Phoenician settlers pushes across the Mediterranean. They are not conquerors, they are traders, refugees and dreamers. They move past Cyprus, past Crete, past the turbulent waters near Sicily. They have no map, no certainty, only experience and instinct guiding them toward a future they can't fully see. Then, one day, they find it. A narrow peninsula jutting into the North African coast. A place with deep waters, natural harbors, fertile fields, and strategic visibility over the entire coastline. It looks less like a discovery and more like a revelation. Exactly the kind of land destined for greatness. Here they settle and build a new city, a city that will one day dominate trade, a city that will forge generals capable of terrifying the world, a city that will eventually challenge Rome itself. They call it Carthage, Carthage, the new city. At first, Carthage grows slowly, a cluster of wooden houses, a small port, a marketplace, a temple to their gods. But the settlers from Tyre bring with them something rare: discipline, organization, and the ability to build wealth using the sea. Unlike other cultures obsessed with territory, the Phoenicians understand that the ocean is the greatest resource of all. So they begin crafting ships, exploring nearby coasts, and forming alliances with North African tribes. By 750 BCE, Carthaginian traders are already establishing commercial relationships across the region. They exchange pottery, dyes, textiles and bronze goods for grain, livestock and precious materials from inland Berber kingdoms. Carthage becomes a middleman between Africa and the Mediterranean world, a position that multiplies its wealth at incredible speed. By 700 BCE, Carthage's influence spreads even farther. Their ships begin reaching Iberia, Sardinia, and the Balearic Islands. They discover mines rich in silver and copper, and soon Carthaginian outposts are scattered across the western Mediterranean like stepping stones of empire. The city is no longer a minor settlement. It is becoming a strategic hub. By 650 BCE, Carthage controls one of the most powerful navies in the ancient world. Their shipyards are capable of producing fleets at a scale that astonishes Greek observers. Their warships feature innovative designs, fast, maneuverable, deadly. Carthaginian captains master every wind pattern, every current, every hidden cove. They begin enforcing naval jurisdiction over the Western Sea, discouraging foreign ships from entering their trade zones. Meanwhile, caravans from the Sahara bring gold and ivory. North African herders provide fine horses. Iberian miners ship tons of metal. Carthage becomes wealthy, not slowly, but explosively. And with wealth comes population. By 600 BCE, the city may already have over 200,000 residents, making it one of the largest urban centers in the Mediterranean. Carthage becomes a magnet for cultures: Phoenician, Libyan, Iberian, Greek, Egyptian, Etruscan, and Berber. Its streets echo with dozens of languages. Its temples tower above the harbor, shining with polished stone and bronze. Its markets overflow with goods from 3 continents. It is a city of trade, diversity, and ambition. But ambition has consequences. Wealth attracts competition. Power creates enemies. And as Carthage grows, another city far to the north begins rising at the same time: Rome. Founded in 753 BCE, Rome is initially nothing compared to Carthage. It is a village of mud huts, while Carthage builds marble temples. Rome has no navy, while Carthage commands hundreds of warships. Rome fights local tribes, while Carthage operates across continents. But beneath Rome's humble exterior burns a ferocious ambition. Two civilizations are now rising along parallel paths. One commands the sea with commerce, the other begins commanding the land with legions. And although neither knows it yet, they are heading toward a collision that will reshape the ancient world forever. But Carthage's rise is not just a story of trade and ships. It is also a story of a woman, a queen whose trauma, intelligence and sacrifice are woven into the city's foundation. A woman whose legend Rome would immortalize in one of its greatest literary works. A woman whose curse, according to myth, would echo across centuries of war. Her name is Dido. She is the founder of Carthage, the first visionary of the city. The queen who escaped a murderous brother, built a new kingdom from the ground up, and vowed that her people would never again live as victims of foreign power. And in her final moments, she declared a curse that would one day drag Carthage and Rome into one of history's most devastating rivalries. To understand Carthage's rise is to understand her, and her story waits in the next chapter. Before Carthage became a powerhouse, before its ships ruled the western Mediterranean, before Rome even understood what kind of rival it was about to face, there was a woman running for her life. Her name was Dido, also known as Alyssa in Phoenician sources, and her story begins not with power, but with betrayal. It is around 825 BC in the great Phoenician city of Tyre, one of the richest and most influential ports in the ancient world. Dido is a princess, trained in politics, commerce, and diplomacy. She is known for her intelligence, her calm authority, and her uncanny ability to read people. Tyrian nobles admire her, merchants trust her, the priesthood respects her. She seems destined to rule alongside her husband, Sebes, a wealthy high priest of Melkart. But power corrupts, and in Tyre, power kills. Dido's brother, Pygmalion, rises to the throne as a young, arrogant, power-hungry king. He fears anyone who challenges his authority, and Esaribus, the respected priest with vast wealth, is a threat. So Pygmalion does the unthinkable. He has Esaribus murdered, not in the shadows, not in secrecy, but openly, brutally, as a declaration that nothing and no one will stand in his way. Dido loses everything in one stroke: her husband, her safety, her future, her city. But she does not break. She plans. Quietly, carefully, she gathers allies who fear Pygmalion's tyranny. She secures ships, gold and loyal support. She waits for the right moment. And then, under the cover of night, Dido leads a desperate escape from Tyre. The legend says she carried with her her husband's hidden treasure, gold that would fund a new beginning. This flight becomes one of the greatest migrations in ancient history. But more importantly, it becomes the birth of Carthage. Dido's fleet wanders for months. They stop in Cyprus, where they take aboard women willing to join their cause. They sail along Africa's northern coast in search of a settlement. They negotiate with local tribes, seeking land where they can rebuild their lives. Eventually they encounter the powerful Berber king Iarbas, ruler of the region around modern-day Tunisia. Iarbas is cautious. Foreign settlers mean trouble. They bring wealth, but also war. So he offers Dido a deal meant to humiliate her. He will give her only as much land as can be covered by a single ox hide. But Dido is smarter than every king in the region. She accepts the offer. Then she orders her people to cut the oxhide into narrow, thin strips, hundreds of them, and lay them end to end around a large hill overlooking the coast. The king watches, stunned, as the settlers claim a massive stretch of land using his own terms against him. The hill becomes known as the Bursa, from the Phoenician word for hide. And around that hill, Dido begins building Carthage. The city rises quickly. Streets take shape. Markets appear. Temples grow. The harbor expands. Trade flows. Within a few years, Carthage becomes one of the richest, most stable, most promising settlements in North Africa. Dido transforms from a refugee queen into a respected ruler. Her leadership becomes legendary. Her wisdom is praised by all who encounter her. But legends never stay peaceful for long. Ibas, humiliated yet impressed, demands Dido marry him. And this is where myth and history collide. Some traditions claim she refused because she vowed faithfulness to her dead husband. Others say she knew marrying Ibas would surrender her people's independence. Either way, her refusal sparks fury. The king threatens war. He threatens to burn the new city. He threatens to destroy everything Dido has built. And faced with the impossible, she chooses a tragic path. She builds a funeral pyre on the hill, climbs its summit, and sacrifices herself either as an offering to the gods or as a final act of defiance against a king who tried to control her destiny. But here is where Rome enters the story. Centuries later, around 19 BCE, the Roman poet Virgil rewrites Dido's legacy in his epic, the Aeneid. In his version, Dido falls in love with Aeneas, the Trojan hero destined to found Rome. When Aeneas leaves her, she dies not for political independence, but for heartbreak, and in her agony, she curses him and his descendants. Let there be eternal hatred between our peoples. This is the curse that Roman storytellers claim ignited the hatred between Rome and Carthage. The curse that echoes through the Punic Wars. The curse that in Rome's imagination justified the destruction of Carthage centuries later. But strip away the poetry, and one truth remains clear. Dido is not just a myth. She is a symbol of survival, a symbol of leadership forged through trauma, a symbol of what Carthage was destined to become. Her people remember her as a queen who built a new life from ashes. Romans remember her as the woman whose curse fueled their greatest war. Modern historians see her as a blend of reality and legend, but Carthaginians saw her as something far more powerful, their founder, their protector, their identity. Her legacy shapes Carthage's culture. For centuries, her story fuels the city's pride. Her curse, real or imagined, lingers like a shadow over its greatest victories and deepest tragedies. Even Carthage's famous leadership system, a senate of wealthy families and a pair of elected magistrates called the Suffetes, reflects the values first established under Dido's rule: order, diplomacy, strategy, independence. She teaches her people that survival requires intelligence, that expansion requires vision, that enemies must be outwitted before they are outfought. Her influence becomes the emotional core of Carthage's identity. Her legend becomes the moral blueprint for Carthaginian ambition. Her story becomes the heartbeat of the city. And in a world filled with male military leaders, Dido stands alone, a woman who founded one of the most powerful civilizations in antiquity. But the story doesn't end with her curse, it begins with it. Because after Dido, Carthage transforms, it grows, evolves, expands, rises. It becomes a superpower, not through war, but through commerce, diplomacy, and the sea. A power that will eventually clash with another rising force across the water: Rome. Two civilizations shaped by destiny, Two peoples unknowingly bound by a mythic curse. Two empires moving toward a collision that will define the ancient world. Now the question becomes, how did Carthage rise from Dido's tragedy into a maritime empire that terrified the Mediterranean? How did it turn its harbors, trade networks and wealth into unmatched global power? That story begins next. To understand Carthage, you must understand the sea. Because Carthage did not rise on land, it did not rise through armies, conquest, or the sword. It rose on waves, on wind, on wood, on ships that carried its people farther than any Mediterranean civilization had gone before. Carthage became great, not because it wanted to dominate others, but because it wanted to dominate the ocean. And it succeeded. The story begins around 700 BCE, when the Carthaginians realized something others had overlooked. Land empires were unstable. Kings died. Borders shifted. Armies mutinied. But the sea was eternal. The sea could not be conquered by one empire alone. The sea offered limitless routes, limitless resources, limitless opportunities. Carthage saw in the sea what others feared, a frontier without end. So while Greece fought internal wars and while Rome was still a cluster of villages beside the Tiber, Carthage built ships, hundreds of them. Large, sturdy merchant vessels capable of surviving storms that sank lesser fleets. Sleek, fast warships designed to intimidate rivals and protect trade routes. Carthage did not just build ships to travel, it built ships to rule. By 650 BCE, Carthaginian sailors had mapped the western Mediterranean with astonishing precision. They knew the winds that blew each season. They knew the currents that pulled across Africa's coastline. They knew where pirates hid, where storms formed, and where hidden harbors provided shelter. Their knowledge was so advanced that later Greek writers accused them of deliberately hiding their maritime charts to prevent foreigners from learning their secrets. Carthaginian ships became the arteries of a vast economic network stretching from Cyprus to the Atlantic Ocean. Their galleys carried purple dye, glass, textiles, gold jewelry, and skilled craftsmen. They returned with silver from Spain, tin from Britain, ivory from the Sahara, and wheat from fertile African plains. Every voyage strengthened the city. Every harbor they docked in expanded their influence. Every route they opened became a new lifeline of wealth. Carthage perfected the art of seamanship. Their shipwrights built vessels with reinforced hulls, advanced rudders, and interchangeable parts that could be replaced during long journeys. Their sailors trained relentlessly, learning to maneuver in tight formations, to ram enemy ships with precision, and to navigate by stars long before Greek science recorded the technique. Some ancient accounts suggest Carthage used lighthouses along its coast centuries before Rome even considered building a navy. The crown jewel of Carthaginian naval power was its famous circular harbor known as the Carthage. This engineering marvel stunned every ancient writer who saw it. From above, it looked like a massive stone eye staring out into the Mediterranean. The outer dock served merchant vessels, the inner dock, surrounded by warehouses, ship sheds, and workshops, housed the war fleet. A central island rose from the water with an observation tower from which commanders could inspect every ship in the harbor. The Carthage was not just a port, it was a naval factory, a military base, a marketplace, and a symbol of absolute maritime mastery. Because of this harbor, Carthage could launch more ships, repair them faster, and store them more efficiently than any other Mediterranean city. Even Greece, with all its naval glory, never built a harbor as sophisticated. Rome had nothing comparable for centuries. The Carthage made Carthage untouchable on the sea, and Carthage guarded that power fiercely. Carthaginian law punished sailors who revealed trade routes to outsiders. Some accounts even claim that captains intentionally sank their ships rather than allow a rival city to follow them to new markets. Whether myth or truth, the message is clear. Carthage understood that knowledge was power, and maritime knowledge was the greatest weapon of all. Carthage also created a network of colonies stretching from Morocco to Spain, from Sicily to Sardinia. These outposts were not imperial provinces. They were supply stations, trade hubs, and cultural bridges, allowing Carthaginian influence to spread naturally. Instead of imposing their rule through violence, they integrated themselves into local economies. They offered trade, protection, and prosperity. In return, they gained access to metals, food, soldiers, and strategic geography. But the sea was more than wealth. It was also security. Carthage knew it could not survive if it relied on land armies alone. It was surrounded by hostile Berber tribes, rival Greek colonies, and unpredictable Mediterranean politics. A powerful navy meant protection. It meant diplomacy through strength. It meant Carthage could strike anywhere, whenever needed, without risking its homeland. For centuries, this strategy worked perfectly. Rome did not understand this world. It had no navy. It saw the sea as a barrier, not a bridge. Roman warfare was built on infantry, discipline, and land campaigns. For generations, the two civilizations lived parallel lives, without crossing paths. Rome looked inward, conquering Italy, piece by piece. Carthage looked outward, conquering the Mediterranean not with armies but with ships and commerce. But parallel lines eventually meet, and the more Rome expanded across the Italian peninsula, the closer it came to clashing with Carthaginian interests in Sicily. That island, sitting between North Africa and Italy, was the key to controlling the central Mediterranean. Carthage had been present there for centuries. Rome wanted it next. Neither could compromise, and for the first time in its history, Rome was forced to confront something it had never faced before, a naval superpower. When the First Punic War erupted in 264 BCE, Rome realized the size of the enemy it was facing. Carthage had centuries of maritime experience. Carthage had fleets that could move faster and strike harder. Carthage had sailors who treated the sea the way Roman legionaries treated the battlefield. Rome entered the war as amateurs. Carthage entered as masters. Carthage, through its mastery of the sea, had built a world power without relying on land conquest. Its empire was not carved by generals, but shaped by merchants and navigators. Its strength came not from marching armies, but from harbors, shipyards, and the endless blue horizon. Carthage understood the Mediterranean in a way Rome never had. The sea was the lifeblood of Carthaginian identity, economy, and power, but every empire built on mastery eventually meets someone who refuses to accept the world as it is. Rome would not accept the sea as Carthage's domain. Rome would not accept its own naval inferiority. Rome would not accept that a city across the water could dictate the future of the Mediterranean. And so, an unstoppable force began moving toward an immovable object. The Punic Wars were coming, and Carthage, the unrivaled master of the sea, was about to meet a land empire willing to reinvent itself entirely to destroy its greatest rival. Now the question becomes, what kind of society produced sailors so skilled, leaders so calculating, and merchants so wealthy that they could challenge the greatest future empire in history? The answer lies inside the walls of Carthage itself. Listen closely, because this is the moment Carthage stops being a city and becomes an empire. The moment it rises from a coastline settlement to the uncontested ruler of the waves, and the moment Rome first learns to fear a power it cannot yet understand. Everything about Carthage's greatness begins here, not with armies, not with kings, but with the sea. Picture the Mediterranean around 800 BCE. Most cities cling to the coastline like nervous children. Storms terrify them. Pirates haunt them. Unknown waters threaten to swallow their ships whole. But Carthage looks at that same sea and sees a highway, an opportunity, a path to dominance, and that mindset changes everything from the very beginning. The Carthaginians aren't like other people. While Rome grows slowly inland, fighting local neighbors and farming the land, Carthage is already sailing, already mapping, already trading, already dreaming, far beyond what its size should allow. The sea becomes their teacher, their shield, and ultimately, their weapon. Carthaginian sailors master navigation techniques centuries before Rome even touches the open sea. They learn to read the stars with precision. They memorize wind patterns and seasonal shifts. They design routes that stretch from Iberia to Egypt, from Sicily to the Atlantic. Every journey sharpens their instincts. Every voyage strengthens their empire. The Mediterranean becomes their neighborhood, and the world begins to notice. Their harbors are masterpieces of engineering. The greatest of them all is the legendary Kothon of Carthage, built around the 5th century BCE. Imagine a massive circular military harbor carved perfectly into the coastline. Inside it, more than 200 warships sit ready to launch at a moment's notice. At its center stands an island with a raised command tower, giving admirals a full view of every ship. It is not just a harbor, it is a statement, a declaration of power carved into stone and sea. The circular shape isn't an artistic choice, it's strategy. Ships can enter, be repaired, resupplied, and launched in a continuous flow. Efficiency becomes a weapon. Speed becomes a weapon. Organization becomes a weapon. Everything is designed for one purpose: control of the Mediterranean. Rome has nothing like it. No one does. But ships alone don't build an empire. The Carthaginians need wealth to fuel their fleets, and they find it where no one else is willing to go. They sail into the Atlantic around 500 BCE under the command of the explorer Hanno. Most civilizations fear the edge of the known world. Carthage sails toward it. Hanno and his fleet travel more than 3,000 miles along the West African coast. They trade with tribes no Mediterranean power has ever heard of. They describe burning mountains and strange animals and lands filled with gold. They map routes no one else dares to follow. Carthage becomes the first Mediterranean civilization to push beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, and it pays off. Gold pours into Carthage. Ivory, exotic goods, rare woods, spices, precious minerals. Everything the ancient world values flows through Carthaginian hands, and the city grows richer, stronger, hungrier. By 600 BCE, Carthage becomes so wealthy that even the great Greek city-states treat it as an equal. By 500 BCE, it rivals the entire Greek world for influence. And by 400 BCE, it controls crucial trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean. Power becomes routine. Dominance becomes expected. Yet what truly sets Carthage apart isn't just its mastery of trade. It's how it transforms that wealth into naval supremacy. Carthaginian shipwrights refine the design of the bireme and then the trireme, creating sleek, fast vessels capable of cutting through waves like knives. They perfect the ram, a deadly bronze-tipped weapon mounted on the prow of their warships. A single perfect strike can sink an enemy vessel instantly. Naval warfare becomes a science, and Carthage becomes its master. But the Carthaginians don't stop there. They innovate again. By the 3rd century BCE, they build the quinquereme, a massive 5-row warship, so powerful it becomes the standard for Mediterranean naval battles for centuries. The Romans will eventually copy it, but the Carthaginians are the ones who create it. They set the standard. They define the era. Their sailors become legends. Not soldiers pressed into service, not farmers turned conscripts, but lifelong seamen, raised on the water. Men who understand the sea the way others understand the streets of their own city. Their reflexes are faster. Their discipline is tighter. Their experience is unmatched. Carthage doesn't simply have a navy. It has a navy of professionals at a time when most powers rely on part-time warriors. Their merchants also serve as spies. Every trade mission becomes a scouting expedition. Every new port becomes a source of intelligence. Every return voyage brings back more than goods. It brings knowledge, and knowledge, in the ancient world, is priceless. But ruling the waves comes with enemies. The Greeks resent Carthaginian control of Sicily and Sardinia. The Etruscans clash with them in Corsica. The Phoenician homeland grows wary of its western child becoming too powerful. Yet Carthage holds its ground. Its navy keeps rivals in check. Its wealth buys influence where force cannot. Its diplomatic network stretches across 3 continents, and through it all, Carthage becomes the silent giant of the Mediterranean. Rome notices, Rome watches, Rome learns. For centuries, Rome remains a landlocked power, a city of soldiers, not sailors, a republic with ambition but without reach. But by the 4th century BCE, Rome collides with Carthaginian influence in Sicily. The two powers glare at each other across the sea. Rome controls the land, Carthage controls the water, and everyone senses what is coming. A war not of borders, but of destiny. This naval empire Carthage builds is more than a network of trade. It is more than a source of wealth. It is more than a shield. It is the foundation of everything Carthage becomes. It shapes its identity. It defines its greatness. And ultimately, it sets the stage for the most legendary rivalry in ancient history. Because the sea that made Carthage powerful will one day attract a challenger bold enough to steal it. When Rome learns to build ships, Carthage learns to fear something it has never feared before: a rival. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world before maps. A world where the edges of the earth are whispered about in fear. A world where deserts swallow entire caravans without leaving a trace, and oceans stretch endlessly into the unknown. Now imagine a single city learning how to turn those terrifying landscapes into rivers of gold. That city was Carthage. And its wealth did not come from chance, or luck, or inherited power. It came from mastery, precision, ruthless ambition, and secrets guarded so fiercely that some of them remained unknown for more than 2,000 years. This wealth did not come from agriculture. It did not come from conquest. It came from trade, but not ordinary trade. Carthage created one of the most complex, far-reaching economic systems in the ancient world. It connected Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. It controlled the sea, it controlled the coasts, and it controlled the silence surrounding its routes. To understand Carthage, you must understand the secret engine that made everything possible. The Mediterranean world of the 8th to 4th centuries BCE was hungry. It needed metals for weapons and tools. It needed grain to feed rising populations. It needed fish, dyes, ivory, fabrics, perfumes, timber, and precious minerals. Carthage stepped into this hunger like a master merchant who knows the value of every shadow. It placed itself at the center of every demand. It became the middleman of entire civilizations, the bridge between lands that never met, the silent hand that guided the markets of ancient history. One of its greatest strengths was its access to Africa. While Greece looked east and Rome looked north, Carthage looked south, deep into the deserts, deep into lands Europeans feared, deep into territories where the sun itself felt like an enemy. But Carthaginian traders did not fear the desert. They learned it. They mastered it. They created networks of camel caravans that stretched across thousands of kilometers. These convoys moved in silence, avoiding hostile tribes and extreme heat. They followed routes known only to initiated merchants. The payoff was unimaginable. From the lands of the Sahara and beyond came gold, pure, untouched, sun-forged gold. The gold of ancient Mali, Senegal, Niger, and Mauritania. Carthage became the first Mediterranean power, with serious access to West African gold long before the rise of great empires like Ghana or Mali. And this gold did not merely enrich the city. It transformed it into a financial powerhouse whose wealth could challenge entire nations. But gold was only the beginning. Ivory flowed through Carthaginian hands in massive quantities. Elephant tusks from North Africa, Central Africa, and even beyond the Sahara were transported to Carthaginian ports. Craftsmen carved them into luxury goods that filled elite households from Egypt to Greece. Wild animal skins, exotic feathers, rare stones, salt and minerals all crossed the desert under the watch of Carthaginian merchants. Then there were the infamous Murex dye workshops. Carthage inherited the secret from Tyre, but it perfected the industry. Purple dye extracted from Mediterranean sea snails became so valuable that wearing it signaled power. Kings used it, generals wore it, the wealthy flaunted it. Carthage controlled its production with an iron grip. The city earned immense fortunes with every drop of color. And then there was Spain. Iberia, with its mountains rich in silver, copper, iron, and gold, became one of Carthage's greatest treasures. By the 5th century BCE, Carthaginian merchants had established deep commercial networks across the peninsula. When Hamilcar Barca later expands into Spain, he does so not as a conqueror, but as a businessman strengthening old ties. The mines of southern Iberia became some of the richest in the ancient world, producing tons of silver annually. Carthage used that silver to finance armies, fleets, and political influence. This wealth made Carthage a global power long before Rome learned to sail beyond its own coastline. Carthaginian merchants did not merely trade goods, they traded information. They collected knowledge from every port, every tribe, every coastline. They learned who was rising, who was falling, who could be manipulated, who could be bought. In an age before intelligence agencies, Carthage built one of the most effective information networks the world had seen, and it turned that information into leverage. The Carthaginians were masters of secrecy. Greek writers often complained that Carthaginian merchants would deliberately mislead rivals. There are stories of Carthaginian captains who, when followed by Greek ships, intentionally ran their own vessel aground rather than reveal hidden trade routes. Their government even rewarded such sacrifices. To Carthage, secrecy was not paranoia, it was policy. Protecting their roots meant protecting their future. But perhaps the most mysterious part of Carthaginian wealth came from the Atlantic. Around 500 BCE, Carthaginian explorer Hanno led a fleet along the West African coast. His voyage remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in ancient exploration. He traveled south past Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, and possibly as far as modern-day Cameroon. His mission was simple: find new markets, new goods, new opportunities, and he found them. He described towering mountains that spewed fire, volcanoes along the West African coast, He described wild creatures unlike anything known in the Mediterranean. Elephants larger than the African ones, Carthaginians hunted. Strange, dangerous animals covered in thick fur, islands where the air trembled with heat, coastlines glittering with minerals and possibility. Carthage did not just explore. It documented, it analyzed, it returned with proposals for future routes. But much of this knowledge became state secrets. And when Carthage fell centuries later, many of those secrets were lost forever. The Carthaginian economic machine had one more advantage: their location. Carthage sat perfectly positioned between east and west, north and south. It could intercept ships from Greece, trade with Egypt, supply grain to Sicily and Sardinia, move goods from Africa into Europe, and spread European goods into Africa. The city became a funnel through which the ancient world poured its wealth. This incredible prosperity funded everything else: the navy, the armies, the war elephants, the mercenaries, the walls, the fleets, the political system. Even the legendary Kothan harbor depended on this economic engine. But wealth always attracts enemies, and Carthage's success brought envy, resentment, and ultimately confrontation. The Greeks challenged Carthaginian influence in Sicily. The Etruscans clashed with them at sea. Minor kingdoms attempted to block trade routes. Carthage defended every route with the same ferocity a mother defends her child. To them, trade was life. Trade was survival. Trade was power. Yet none of these rivals would compare to the enemy waiting on the horizon. A city across the sea. A city growing rapidly. A city whose ambitions swelling with every victory. A city that looked at Carthage and saw not a partner or a neighbor, but an obstacle: Rome. For now, Carthage ruled the trade of the Mediterranean with confidence. Its wealth seemed limitless. Its roots seemed eternal. Its influence seemed untouchable. But history shows a cruel pattern. The more a power grows, the more the world conspires to challenge it. And Carthage, at the height of its wealth, was about to meet the one opponent strong enough to break everything it built. By the mid-4th century BCE, Carthage was at the height of its power. Its fleets ruled the western Mediterranean. Its wealth was unparalleled. Its colonies stretched across North Africa, Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily. The city had grown from a refugee settlement into an empire fueled by trade, strategy, and a culture of relentless ambition. Yet even at its peak, Carthage could not ignore the storm brewing to the north. A rising city that would soon challenge everything it had built. Rome. Rome, in the 4th century BCE, was far from the superpower it would become. Yet it was a growing republic, disciplined and unyielding, shaped by centuries of warfare against the neighboring Etruscans, Samnites, and Latin tribes. Rome's strength lay in its legions, soldiers trained not only to fight but to endure, to adapt, to win. While Carthage ruled the sea, Rome was mastering the land, expanding its influence across the Italian peninsula with methodical precision. By the time it looked to Sicily, Carthage's territory directly conflicted with Rome's ambitions. Sicily was more than a fertile island, it was a strategic jewel in the central Mediterranean. For Carthage, Sicily had been under influence since the 6th century BCE. Cities like Panormus, Multia, and Lilybaeum were critical trade hubs. They were connected to Carthage's main ports by fleets that ensured supply and control over maritime commerce. Losing Sicily would mean losing dominance over the central Mediterranean, and with it, the security of Carthage's far-reaching trade networks. Rome's attention to Sicily began around 264 BCE, triggered by local conflicts on the island. The Mamertines, mercenaries who had seized the city of Messana, appealed to Rome for protection against Syracuse, a powerful Greek city-state allied with Carthage. Rome saw an opportunity to expand its influence beyond the Italian mainland. Carthage, meanwhile, had been supporting Syracuse for decades as part of its Sicilian network. What began as a local dispute soon escalated into a clash between two of the most ambitious powers in history. The First Punic War had begun. Carthage, confident in its naval superiority, assumed that Rome would retreat. After all, Rome had no experienced navy. Its ships were untested. Its sailors had never crossed the open seas with the skill of Carthaginian mariners. But Rome refused to yield. In a remarkable display of determination and innovation, Rome began building its own fleet, learning from captured Carthaginian ships, and inventing devices like the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to fight as if on land, while on enemy vessels. For the first time, Carthage encountered a power that refused to accept its dominance of the sea. Battles were fought, not just for territory but for survival. Carthaginian fleets, long accustomed to uncontested control of Mediterranean waters, faced Rome's relentless adaptive strategy. The encounter demonstrated something crucial. Wealth and experience alone were not enough to guarantee victory. Determination, innovation, and sheer persistence could challenge even the mightiest empire. The war dragged on for over 20 years. Cities changed hands multiple times. Ports were captured, abandoned, and recaptured. Carthage's generals, skilled and patient, fought Rome with precision, yet Rome's legions proved relentless, and their capacity to adapt shocked Carthage's commanders. Sicily became a chessboard where every harbor, every hill, every supply line mattered. The island became a microcosm of the larger struggle between these two powers, one rooted in trade, commerce, and naval dominance, the other in discipline, land power, and relentless adaptation. Carthage suffered not only from the strength of Rome's armies, but also from internal struggles. Its political system, dominated by wealthy merchant families, often hesitated in the field of battle. Decisions were debated in the Senate, and disagreements sometimes paralyzed action at critical moments. Yet even with these challenges, Carthage's resilience was remarkable. It rebuilt fleets rapidly, replaced lost generals, and maintained its far-reaching trade networks throughout the war, ensuring that the city itself did not starve even in times of intense conflict. The First Punic War also demonstrated how far Rome was willing to go. By 260 BCE, Rome had transformed from a land-based power into a naval force capable of challenging Carthage directly. Rome's willingness to adapt and innovate set the stage for centuries of conflict. For Carthage, the lesson was clear. Rome would not be contained by treaties, diplomacy, or intimidation. Rome would fight relentlessly, and it would learn quickly. At the same time, Carthage's strategy remained rooted in pragmatism. Its generals understood the value of alliances, bribery, and diplomacy. They used mercenaries drawn from across North Africa, Spain, and even Gaul. They leveraged their wealth to influence cities and tribes far beyond their borders. Their approach was sophisticated, strategic, and, for centuries, largely successful. But the clash with Rome revealed an unexpected vulnerability. Carthage's power, built on trade and naval mastery, could not fully compensate for Rome's persistence, adaptability, and growing military expertise. The conflict was no longer a war for Sicily. It was a test of whether wealth, strategy, and experience could withstand unrelenting determination and adaptation. By the end of the First Punic War in 241 BCE, Carthage had lost Sicily. It had been forced to pay a massive indemnity, and its reputation as an uncontested maritime superpower had been shaken. Yet Carthage endured. It rebuilt, rearmed, and strengthened its colonies in Spain. The loss was painful, but not fatal. Carthage's engines of wealth, knowledge and trade remained intact, and they would fuel its next confrontation with Rome, an even more dramatic and dangerous encounter that would define the future of both empires. The first clash between Carthage and Rome was not a final battle, it was a warning. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and vision. Carthage learned that wealth alone could not guarantee security. Rome learned that ambition required persistence. Sicily had become the proving ground, a stage upon which two civilizations would measure each other's strengths and weaknesses. And in that measurement, the seeds of the Second Punic War were quietly planted. Carthage's wealth, its far-reaching trade, and its mastery of the sea remained. Rome's determination, its growing military expertise, and its willingness to innovate had been revealed. The stage was set for the next chapter, a confrontation that would see generals rise to legendary status, cities burn, and the Mediterranean tremble under the ambitions of two titanic civilizations. The year was 264 BCE, and the Mediterranean was about to witness the birth of a conflict unlike anything it had seen before. Carthage, with centuries of maritime experience and unparalleled wealth, stood at the pinnacle of its power. Its fleets dominated the Western Sea, its colonies stretched across strategic points, and its trade network funneled wealth from Africa, Spain, and beyond into the city. Rome, by contrast, was a land-based power, growing steadily on the Italian peninsula. It had discipline, determination, and ambition, but it lacked the experience and mastery of the oceans that Carthage wielded so effortlessly. And yet, the stage was set for the First Punic War, a war that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean itself. The conflict began on the island of Sicily, a jewel of fertile land and strategic harbors. The Mamertines, mercenaries who had seized the city of Messana, appealed to Rome for protection against Syracuse, a Greek city-state allied with Carthage. Rome saw opportunity and responded, sending legions to the island. Carthage, confident in its naval superiority and long-standing influence in Sicily, intervened to protect its interests. What began as a localized dispute escalated quickly into a confrontation between two of the most ambitious powers in history. Carthage's initial advantage was undeniable. Its fleets were vast and experienced, manned by sailors who had navigated the Western Mediterranean for centuries. Its ships were larger, faster, and better equipped than anything Rome had seen. The Carthaginians could move armies across the sea with ease, resupply their forces at distant colonies, and strike with precision at any target. For decades, their mastery of trade and navigation had made them untouchable on the waters. They were the gatekeepers of the Mediterranean, and Rome had never challenged such power before. But Rome refused to retreat. The Republic quickly adapted, building a fleet of its own. Using captured Carthaginian ships as models, Roman engineers innovated and designed vessels with new tactical advantages. They invented the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to turn naval battles into land battles, where their disciplined infantry excelled. Rome's legions, trained for land warfare, suddenly became a deadly force at sea. What Carthage had assumed would be an easy victory turned into a brutal, protracted struggle. The First Punic War would last 23 years, from 264 to 241 BCE. It was a conflict unlike any the ancient world had experienced, a war fought simultaneously on land and sea, with victories and defeats measured in months and decades. Carthage's commanders, experienced in maritime strategy, faced the relentless persistence of Roman innovation. Battles at sea were massive and chaotic, with hundreds of ships clashing in formations designed to ram, board, and overwhelm. Rome's use of the corvus changed the dynamics of naval warfare, neutralizing Carthage's advantages and leveling the playing field. Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries drawn from its colonies and allied territories. North Africans, Iberians, Gauls and Libyans fought under Carthaginian banners, creating a multinational force that could be deployed anywhere. Yet this reliance on hired soldiers also introduced complications. Loyalty could be uncertain, discipline could falter, and strategic decisions were often slowed by the political debates of Carthage's ruling elite. Unlike Rome, which could issue orders through its highly disciplined legions, Carthage had to navigate a complex network of internal politics and mercenary management while waging war across multiple theaters. The war was not only a test of military strength, but also a test of endurance and logistics. Sicily became a war zone, with cities repeatedly captured and recaptured. Ports were fortified, besieged and rebuilt. Supply lines stretched across the sea, requiring Carthage to deploy its naval supremacy to maintain connections between the mainland, colonies, and mercenary forces. Rome, meanwhile, struggled to sustain operations on foreign soil, learning lessons in strategy, resource allocation, and naval engineering that would shape its military doctrine for centuries. By 256 BCE, Carthage had suffered a series of setbacks despite its naval experience. The Romans captured the strategic city of Panormus, securing a critical foothold in western Sicily. Battles like Mylae in 260 BCE had already demonstrated that Rome was capable of challenging Carthage at sea. The Carthaginian advantage in navigation, experience and speed was being eroded by Rome's relentless determination and innovation. What had seemed like invincible maritime supremacy now faced an adversary willing to learn, adapt and endure. Carthage's response was strategic and calculated. Its generals avoided unnecessary losses, reinforced fortifications, and leveraged alliances to maintain influence over key regions. They still controlled much of the western Mediterranean and retained their colonies and trade networks. Yet Rome's persistence made it clear that Carthage could no longer rely solely on naval dominance. It had to confront a new reality, a rival that combined land power with innovative naval tactics, capable of threatening Carthage's supremacy at every turn. The war finally drew to a close in 241 BCE. With Carthage suffering a decisive naval defeat at the Battle of the Aegates Islands. Rome's fleet, well-trained and strategically prepared, outmaneuvered Carthage, destroying a significant portion of its naval power. The result was catastrophic. Carthage was forced to pay a massive indemnity to Rome and withdraw from Sicily entirely. The Republic, once a minor power, had emerged as a major force in the Mediterranean, capable of challenging the mightiest maritime empire of the era. The First Punic War reshaped the balance of power in the ancient world. Carthage, despite its experience, wealth and naval expertise, had learned the limits of relying solely on maritime supremacy. Rome, through innovation, persistence and adaptation, had proven that ANF could overcome centuries of experience and tradition. The war set the stage for a rivalry that would continue for generations, culminating in conflicts that would test the very survival of both empires. Yet even in defeat, Carthage endured. Its wealth remained intact, its trade networks continued to thrive, and its colonies in Spain and North Africa provided resources to rebuild its navy and military strength. The Republic had survived one of the most challenging conflicts in its history, and lessons learned during the First Punic War would inform Carthage's strategies in future confrontations with Rome. The city had faced a mortal threat and adapted, proving that even in loss it could endure and recover. The First Punic War was more than a battle over Sicily. It was a trial by fire for both civilizations. It tested military innovation, endurance, logistics, and political resolve. It demonstrated that wealth and experience, while powerful, are not invincible. Determination, adaptation, and persistence could challenge even the greatest empires. The war also marked the beginning of a rivalry that would shape the Mediterranean for centuries to come, culminating in the legendary campaigns of generals like Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal, whose strategies would echo across history. The end of the First Punic War in 241 BCE left Carthage wounded, but not broken. Sicily, once the crown jewel of the western Mediterranean, was lost to Rome. The fleets that had ruled the waves were battered, indemnities drained the treasury. Yet Carthage was not a city that surrendered. It was a city built on resilience, trade, and vision. City that understood that true power was not only in conquest, but in strategy and preparation. And at this critical moment, one man would define Carthage's path forward: Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar was no ordinary general. Born into a prominent Carthaginian family, he had grown up learning the art of war and the politics of trade. By the time he took command after the First Punic War, Carthage needed more than military skill. It needed vision, innovation, and the audacity to rebuild an empire from the ashes of defeat. Hamilcar was that visionary. He understood that Carthage could not simply rebuild Sicily. Rome would never allow it. Instead, he looked to Spain, a land rich in resources, metals, and strategic opportunities. Spain, or Iberia, offered everything Carthage required. Its mountains concealed veins of silver, copper, and iron. Its rivers and coastlines provided trade routes to the Mediterranean. Its tribal societies could be brought under Carthaginian influence, or, at the very least, used as allies in future conflicts. Hamilcar launched his campaign in the mid-230s BCE, gathering loyal troops, veterans of the Sicilian campaigns, and ambitious mercenaries. His vision was clear: create a new base of power that would secure Carthage's wealth, its military strength, and its ability to challenge Rome in the future. Upon arrival in Spain, Hamilcar faced immediate challenges. The terrain was rugged, the tribes often hostile, and Roman spies were already watching every move. But Hamilcar approached these obstacles as opportunities. He forged alliances with some tribes through trade and diplomacy, while he subdued others with precise military campaigns. His strategy was methodical: control the coastlines to secure trade, fortify key mountain passes to defend against uprisings, and extract the riches of the land to finance Carthage's resurgence. By the 220s BCE, Hamilcar had transformed southern Spain into a Carthaginian stronghold. Cities like Gades became trading hubs, connecting Iberian metals to Carthage. Mines were opened and operated with precision, producing silver and copper that flowed back to North Africa, replenishing Carthage's treasury after the costly losses to Rome. Carthage's economy, once constrained by war indemnities, now surged forward, fueled by Iberia's riches. But Hamilcar's genius extended beyond economics. He understood that Carthage's greatest asset was not gold or silver, it was its people, and so he trained a new generation of soldiers, commanders, and administrators. He instilled in them a culture of loyalty, discipline, and relentless ambition. Among these young men was Hannibal Barca, his son, who would later become one of history's most formidable generals. Hamilcar did not simply rebuild Carthage's influence in Spain, he built the foundation for the city's future military dominance. Spain also became a laboratory for military innovation. Hamilcar experimented with combining Carthaginian mercenaries, Iberian troops, and war elephants into integrated forces, capable of challenging any Roman army. He honed siege tactics, mountain warfare strategies, and mobile cavalry operations, all while maintaining the discipline necessary to control mercenaries from diverse regions. By the time he returned to Carthage periodically, he had created not just a regional power, but a training ground for an empire in waiting. Hamilcar's campaigns in Spain were not without cost. Battles were fierce, losses were significant, and local resistance was constant. Yet his persistence and strategic brilliance allowed Carthage to secure vast territories. By controlling the silver-rich regions near New Carthage, Hamilcar ensured that Carthage could finance future military campaigns without relying solely on its North African base. His vision was long-term. Rome had won the battle for Sicily, but Carthage would prepare to challenge Rome on its own terms, in a theater of its choosing. Beyond the military and economic aspects, Hamilcar's rule also emphasized diplomacy and cultural integration. He encouraged trade with local tribes, respected certain local customs, and rewarded loyalty with titles, land, and privileges. Carthage's presence in Spain was not only military, it was also administrative and economic. The city's influence extended into local governance, ensuring that Carthage's power was resilient and deeply rooted. By the time Hamilcar died in 229 BCE, his legacy was undeniable. He had transformed Spain from a distant frontier into a thriving Carthaginian province, rich in resources and defended by a capable army. More importantly, he had cultivated a new generation of leaders, including Hannibal, who inherited not only his father's skill, but his vision and determination. Hamilcar's campaigns ensured that Carthage remained a force capable of challenging Rome for centuries to come. Hamilcar Barca's story is not just a tale of conquest, it is a testament to strategic foresight, resilience, and the power of rebuilding after defeat. Carthage had lost Sicily, but under Hamilcar, it gained something more enduring: a secure economic base, a trained and loyal military, and the seeds of a revenge that would shake the ancient world. His campaigns in Spain set the stage for the Second Punic War, where Carthage, under the leadership of Hannibal, would confront Rome with unprecedented boldness. Spain became more than a colony, it became a symbol of Carthaginian resilience. It was a place where wealth, military strength, and ambition converged. And it was here that Carthage prepared to rise once more, not merely as a city, but as a civilization ready to reclaim its place as a Mediterranean superpower. Imagine standing on the slopes of the Alps in 218 BCE, shivering as snow whips across your face. Beneath you, a column of soldiers trudges forward, their armor glinting faintly in the weak winter sun. Behind them, war elephants stamp the ground, snorting and swaying in the icy wind. At the head of this army rides a man whose reputation will echo through history. Hannibal Barca, the son of Hamilcar, the architect of Carthage's resurgence in Spain, and a general whose brilliance would terrify the greatest empire of the ancient world, Rome. Hannibal's story begins long before the Alps. He was born into a world shaped by ambition and revenge. As a boy, he swore an oath to his father, Hamilcar, that he would never be a friend to Rome. That promise would define his life. He grew up learning strategy, tactics, and diplomacy. He watched his father turn Spain into a Carthaginian stronghold and inherited not just land and armies, but vision, intelligence, and unbreakable determination. Hannibal was not only trained in the art of war, he was taught to think in decades, to plan in layers, and to anticipate the unpredictable. By the time he assumed command of Carthage's armies in Spain, Hannibal had already demonstrated his audacity. He subdued rebellious tribes, expanded Carthaginian influence, and secured vast resources to fund a campaign that would later astonish the Mediterranean world. But his true ambition lay beyond Iberia. He knew that the only way to avenge Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War and to reclaim its position as a Mediterranean superpower was to confront Rome directly. In 218 BCE, Hannibal executed a plan that would become legendary. He crossed the Ebro River in Spain, violating the treaty Carthage had signed with Rome decades earlier. This bold move initiated the Second Punic War. Hannibal did not merely invade, he planned a campaign that would strike at the heart of Rome's pride, territory, and confidence. He understood Rome's strengths: disciplined legions, strategic fortresses, and an unshakable belief in their dominance. To challenge Rome, Hannibal would need innovation, audacity, and psychological warfare. His plan was as dangerous as it was brilliant. Hannibal marched his army from Spain through southern Gaul, navigating hostile territories, treacherous rivers, and hostile tribes. He then faced the ultimate test: the Alps, a mountain range that few armies could cross, let alone with elephants. Hannibal's march over the Alps was not only a logistical nightmare, it was a calculated statement. He was telling Rome that Carthage could strike where it was least expected, that the Mediterranean was no longer a barrier, and that the Carthaginians were willing to endure unimaginable hardship to achieve their goals. The crossing itself became a story of endurance and genius. Hannibal managed to move tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and elephants over narrow mountain paths, often fighting off ambushes from tribes defending their territory. Many soldiers and animals perished, yet Hannibal's leadership kept the army together. He motivated his men with speeches that emphasized honor, vengeance, and the destiny of Carthage. His ability to inspire loyalty under extreme conditions was unparalleled. By the time the army descended into the Po Valley in northern Italy, Hannibal had already achieved something remarkable. He had transformed hardship into psychological advantage, proving that Carthage was a force that Rome could neither ignore nor underestimate. Once in Italy, Hannibal unleashed a campaign of strategy, cunning, and terror. He avoided direct assaults on heavily fortified Roman cities, understanding that sieges would sap his strength. Instead, he engaged Rome's armies in open battles where his tactical brilliance could dominate. Battles such as Trebia, 218 BCE, Lake Trasimene, 217 BCE, and Cannae, 216 BCE, showcased Hannibal's ability to manipulate terrain, use ambushes, and outthink larger Roman forces. At Cannae, he orchestrated a double envelopment maneuver that annihilated Rome's legions, killing tens of thousands in a single day. The Romans had never faced such a defeat. The Mediterranean world watched in shock as Hannibal demonstrated that a smaller, disciplined, and innovative force could destroy the heart of Rome's military might. Hannibal's genius was not only in battle but in strategy and diplomacy. He sought allies among Rome's discontented neighbors in Italy, Etruscans, Samnites, and even some Greek cities. His goal was to weaken Rome's alliances and create internal pressure, turning Rome's power network against itself. While his army could not capture Rome's capital, his campaign destabilized the Italian peninsula for over a decade. Rome had to divert resources, rethink strategy, and adapt in ways it had never done before. Hannibal forced Rome to fight on multiple fronts, while never allowing them to predict his next move. Yet Hannibal's campaign in Italy was also limited by logistics and politics. Despite victories, he could not bring the city of Rome to its knees. Carthage's support from North Africa was inconsistent. Roman resilience, innovation, and determination gradually countered the shock of Hannibal's initial triumphs. The war became a prolonged struggle of attrition, with Hannibal demonstrating both brilliance and the limits of even the most daring strategy. Hannibal's legacy, however, is not measured by victory alone. It is measured by audacity, vision, and the ability to challenge the seemingly invincible. For over a decade, Rome feared Hannibal as much as it respected him. Generals, historians, and later strategists would study his maneuvers for centuries. His crossing of the Alps became a symbol of relentless courage. His tactics at Cannae became a benchmark of military genius. Hannibal was more than a commander. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of Carthage's enduring ambition. Even after eventual defeat in the Second Punic War, Hannibal's name continued to echo through history. Rome learned humility, adaptation, and the limits of overconfidence. Carthage learned that vision, courage, and strategy could challenge even the mightiest power. Hannibal became the living symbol of Carthage's resistance, a reminder that the city's ambition was not easily quenched. Hannibal Barca was more than a general. He was the embodiment of Carthage itself, bold, innovative, relentless, and unyielding. His campaigns terrified Rome, reshaped the Mediterranean battlefield, and left a legacy that still inspires military thinkers today. His story reminds us that history is shaped not just by empires, but by the vision, courage, and genius of individuals willing to defy the odds and challenge the world. The Second Punic War, beginning in 218 BCE, was not just a conflict between armies, it was a battle of wills, strategy, and survival. For Carthage, led by the brilliant Hannibal Barca, it was a chance to avenge the humiliating defeat of the First Punic War. For Rome, it was a fight for survival, a test of resilience, and a war that would define its destiny. The stage was Italy, a land that had never faced an enemy like Hannibal, a general who combined tactical genius, audacity, and the ability to inspire loyalty even under unimaginable hardship. Hannibal's campaign began with the daring and legendary Alps crossing. Thousands of soldiers, cavalry units, and war elephants traversed treacherous mountain paths, facing freezing temperatures, hostile tribes, and rugged terrain. Many perished along the way, yet Hannibal maintained order, morale, and focus. His army emerged into northern Italy as a hardened, disciplined force, ready to challenge Rome on its own soil. The psychological impact alone was immense. Rome had never faced an enemy who could bring the fight directly to its heart, traversing mountains, thought impassable and appearing where no one expected. The war unfolded as a series of brilliant maneuvers, with Hannibal using both terrain and strategy to devastating effect. At the Battle of Trebia, 218 BCE, Hannibal lured Roman forces into a trap along the frozen riverbanks. Using his cavalry and infantry in coordinated attacks, he inflicted massive casualties and demonstrated his mastery of battlefield tactics. The Romans were forced to retreat, humiliated, and shocked at the precision with which their disciplined legions had been outmaneuvered. The following year, Hannibal orchestrated the Battle of Lake Trasimene, 217 BCE, an ambush that remains one of the largest in ancient military history. He exploited the fog, terrain, and Roman overconfidence to envelop and destroy the Roman forces almost completely. It was a textbook example of strategy overpowering numbers. Hannibal understood not only the movements of armies, but the psychology of commanders, the expectations of soldiers, and the vulnerabilities of an enemy who believed its strength to be absolute. Hannibal's most famous victory, the Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE, would become the stuff of legend. Facing a Roman force far larger than his own, Hannibal arranged his troops in a crescent formation that allowed him to envelop the enemy from all sides. The Romans, despite their discipline, were trapped and annihilated. Tens of thousands were killed in a single day. The psychological effect on Rome was profound. Fear, shock, and panic spread across the city. Hannibal's name became synonymous with terror. The Mediterranean world watched as a general of a smaller, wealthy, and previously defeated power had humiliated the mightiest army in Italy. Yet Hannibal's campaign was not without challenges. Despite victories, he could not capture Rome itself. The city's fortifications, disciplined citizen legions, and the ability to withstand sieges frustrated even the brilliant Carthaginian general. Hannibal's supply lines stretched across hostile territory, reliant on allies whose loyalty was often uncertain. While the victories demonstrated his tactical genius, they also highlighted the limits of war without full logistical support. Rome's network of alliances and its capacity to raise new armies repeatedly mitigated Hannibal's battlefield successes. Hannibal's campaign in Italy was also a war of attrition, a test of endurance for both sides. He moved swiftly, choosing battles that would maximize impact, disrupt Roman confidence, and encourage rebellion among Rome's allies. Yet he lacked the resources to maintain a long-term siege of the city itself. Roman resilience, political cohesion, and the ability to replenish forces made victory in Italy difficult for Carthage, despite repeated tactical successes. Hannibal's genius lay in keeping Rome off balance, forcing the Republic to react rather than act decisively, and turning the Italian peninsula into a stage where Carthage could exert influence without fully conquering territory. Meanwhile, Rome adapted. Its strategy shifted from direct confrontation to a war of patience, supply disruption, and attritional tactics. Roman generals, including Fabius Maximus, avoided large-scale battles, instead harassing Carthaginian forces, cutting supply lines, and waiting for the right opportunity to strike decisively. Rome learned from its mistakes, innovated, and became more flexible. Hannibal, for all his brilliance, was forced to contend with a foe that refused to be broken by a single defeat. Hannibal's campaign was also notable for its psychological impact across Italy. Cities that had previously been loyal to Rome wavered, some even switching allegiance temporarily to Carthage. Hannibal's ability to inspire fear and respect among allies and enemies alike demonstrated his strategic mastery beyond the battlefield. Yet, despite the widespread disruption, he could not fully sever Rome's influence over the Italian peninsula. Rome's political resilience and the loyalty of key allies proved stronger than even Hannibal anticipated. Over more than a decade, Hannibal kept Rome on the defensive, demonstrating that audacity, tactical innovation, and strategic foresight could challenge a superpower, yet the war remained unresolved. Carthage had victories but lacked the resources and political will to capitalize fully on them. Rome had resilience and manpower, but had suffered enormous losses and humiliation. The Second Punic War in Italy became a prolonged, grueling struggle, a test not only of armies but of the endurance, ingenuity, and determination of civilizations themselves. Ultimately, Hannibal's campaign in Italy forced Rome to innovate militarily and politically. The war reshaped Roman military doctrine, creating lessons in logistics, strategy, and patience that would influence Roman expansion for centuries. Hannibal, meanwhile, became a legend of unparalleled military brilliance, a symbol of Carthage's enduring ambition, and a reminder that even the mightiest empire could be challenged by vision, courage, and ingenuity. Yet despite Hannibal's extraordinary victories, the war also highlighted Carthage's vulnerability. Without reinforcements from North Africa and a city willing to commit fully to the campaign, Hannibal's brilliant maneuvers could not secure ultimate victory. Rome's capacity to absorb losses, mobilize resources, and endure setbacks eventually shifted the balance of power. Hannibal remained undefeated in the field, yet the strategic outcome began to favor Rome. Hannibal's Italian campaign would resonate through history as one of the greatest examples of military genius. He did not merely fight battles, he reshaped the psychological, tactical, and strategic landscape of the Mediterranean. Rome learned humility, adaptation, and the limits of overconfidence. Carthage demonstrated that intelligence, daring, and determination could challenge even the most formidable empires. The Second Punic War in Italy became a crucible that tested the limits of leadership, endurance, and the capacity to confront history itself. By 202 BCE, the Second Punic War had raged for 16 long, brutal years. Hannibal, the terror of Rome, had campaigned relentlessly across Italy, winning battles that would be remembered for millennia. Yet Rome had endured. Its legions were rebuilt. Its political machinery had adapted. Its alliances remained largely intact. Carthage, despite Hannibal's brilliance, could no longer sustain the conflict on Italian soil without reinforcements from Africa. The stage was set for the war's decisive confrontation, the Battle of Zama, where Rome would finally confront Carthage's power at its heart. Scipio Africanus, Rome's young and brilliant general, had emerged as the architect of Carthage's impending defeat. Having cut off Hannibal's support in Spain and strengthened Rome's African campaign, Scipio understood the necessity of forcing a decisive battle. He had studied Hannibal's tactics meticulously, learning from the defeats that Rome had suffered. He knew that victory would require more than numbers. It would require innovation, discipline, and the ability to neutralize Hannibal's famed war elephants. Scipio's preparation was meticulous, reflecting the lessons Rome had accumulated over decades of conflict. Carthage, confident in Hannibal's legendary prowess, assembled an army combining African infantry, Iberian mercenaries, and war elephants, all under Hannibal's experienced command. Hannibal was aware that Rome now faced him on his home continent. This battle would be the culmination of his decades-long campaign, a final opportunity to restore Carthage's hegemony. The stakes could not have been higher. Rome's survival, Carthage's empire, and the balance of power across the Mediterranean were all on the line. The battle itself demonstrated the mastery of both commanders. Hannibal deployed his forces with precision, placing war elephants at the front to disrupt and intimidate the Roman lines. His infantry formed strong, disciplined blocks ready to absorb Roman attacks and strike with deadly counter-assaults. He expected Rome to falter, as so many had before, yet Scipio had anticipated every move. He devised formations to neutralize the elephants, opening corridors in his ranks to allow the beasts to pass harmlessly through, while archers and spearmen attacked their handlers. Scipio had turned Hannibal's greatest psychological weapon into a tactical vulnerability. As the battle commenced, the clash of armies was thunderous. Elephants charged, infantry clashed, cavalry swept the flanks, and spears met shields in a deadly cacophony. Hannibal's experience allowed him to adapt quickly, repositioning forces and exploiting weaknesses. But Scipio's preparation and discipline held firm. The Roman legions, well-trained and cohesive, absorbed the shock of the elephants and pressed forward with relentless precision. Carthaginian formations began to falter under sustained pressure. Scipio's cavalry, commanded by Numidian allies, executed a decisive maneuver, striking the Carthaginian flanks and rear. Hannibal's forces, encircled and exhausted, could not maintain cohesion. The psychological toll of the Romans' adaptability and Scipio's superior positioning compounded the physical exhaustion of years of campaigning. Hannibal, brilliant as ever, attempted to rally his troops, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. The Battle of Zama ended in a catastrophic defeat for Carthage. Hannibal's army was shattered, thousands were killed or captured. Rome had secured not just a military victory, but a psychological one, demonstrating that no general, no matter how brilliant, could overcome Rome's resilience, adaptability, and strategic foresight indefinitely. Scipio Africanus emerged as one of history's greatest military leaders, a commander capable of analyzing, adapting, and outmaneuvering even the most legendary opponent. The consequences of Zama were monumental. Carthage was forced to surrender its fleet, pay an enormous indemnity, and abandon any ambitions of expansion outside Africa. Its influence over Spain, Sardinia, Sicily, and other Mediterranean territories was terminated. Rome, meanwhile, solidified its dominance, emerging as the uncontested power of the Western Mediterranean. The battle marked the end of Carthage's hegemony and the beginning of Rome's rise to imperial dominance, a shift that would shape the Mediterranean world for centuries. Hannibal, despite his defeat, retained his reputation for brilliance. Rome feared him not merely as an adversary, but as a strategic mind whose genius could have toppled empires. He continued to serve Carthage politically, attempting reforms to restore its stability and prevent future conflicts. Yet Zama had irrevocably altered the balance of power. Carthage was no longer the maritime and commercial titan it had been. It was a weakened state, forced to live under the shadow of Rome. The Battle of Zama illustrates more than military tactics. It shows the culmination of decades of rivalry, the consequences of ambition, and the endurance of civilizations under pressure. Hannibal's campaign in Italy had terrified Rome, but Scipio's victory demonstrated that adaptability, intelligence, and preparation could overcome even the most legendary adversary. The Mediterranean would never be the same. Carthage, once the dominant power of the Western Sea, had been humbled. Rome, once a regional power in Italy, was now a superpower poised to reshape the ancient world. In many ways, Zama was more than a battle. It was a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and the harsh reality of history. It reminds us that brilliance alone does not guarantee success without resources, strategic support, and adaptability. Hannibal's genius clashed with Scipio's preparation, and while one captivated history with tactical brilliance, the other secured it with decisive strategic victory. The echoes of Zama would reverberate for centuries. Carthage's fall from hegemony became a cautionary tale about the limits of power and the inevitability of adaptation. Rome's victory laid the foundation for an empire that would dominate Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean for generations. And Hannibal, though defeated, became immortal, a symbol of courage, genius, and the enduring spirit of Carthage. The defeat at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE marked more than the end of a war. It was the beginning of Carthage's slow and painful decline. Once a maritime superpower, the city that had dominated trade, commanded armies across continents, and terrified Rome now faced a reality defined by limitations and humiliation. The loss of Spain, the surrender of its fleet, and the enormous war indemnities imposed by Rome were not simply financial blows. They were a wound to Carthage's identity, to its pride, and to its sense of destiny. Carthage had survived the First Punic War through resilience, adaptability, and the leadership of generals like Hamilcar Barca. Yet after Zama, the city faced constraints it could not easily overcome. Its navy, once the largest and most feared in the Western Mediterranean, had been dismantled. Carthaginian trade routes were disrupted, and colonies in Spain and other territories were lost or severely weakened. The city's ability to project power across the Mediterranean was gone. Carthage had become a shadow of its former self, confined largely to North Africa, dependent on Rome's goodwill for survival. The psychological toll was immense. For generations, Carthage had been defined by wealth, naval dominance, and commercial influence. Its citizens had taken pride in the city's ability to control trade across continents, to maintain armies far from home, and to resist external powers. Zama shattered that confidence. The reality of Roman supremacy was undeniable. Carthage was no longer the dominant power. It was a client state, forced to navigate the delicate politics imposed by a rival that had proven both relentless and adaptable. Despite this, Carthage did not immediately disappear. the city retained wealth, infrastructure, and a population capable of rebuilding. The merchant elite continued to trade across the Mediterranean, and Carthage remained a cultural and economic hub. Its streets were still filled with the vibrancy of a cosmopolitan city. Phoenician traditions mingled with Berber, Greek, and Etruscan influences. Markets overflowed with goods. Temples stood as monuments to the city's past grandeur, and the lessons of Hannibal and Hamilcar lived on in the minds of its leaders. Yet the shadow of Rome was everywhere. Carthage was forced to adhere to strict limitations. No war elephants, no fleets beyond a few small vessels, and no ability to wage war without Roman approval. Its territory was reduced, and its political autonomy curtailed. Rome had turned a former rival into a client state, using treaties and diplomacy as effectively as Hannibal had used battlefield genius. The city's identity, once tied to military might and independence, was now redefined by subservience, diplomacy, and survival. Internal tensions grew as well. Carthage's elite, accustomed to commanding armies and fleets, now had to navigate a city constrained by treaties and oversight. Political divisions emerged between factions that sought to restore Carthage's former glory and those advocating cautious compliance with Rome. Social unrest occasionally flared among mercenaries and citizens frustrated with the city's diminished role in the Mediterranean. Carthage had lost not just its empire but a sense of unity, and the seeds of internal instability were sown in the decades following Zama. Economically, Carthage adapted but could not regain dominance. The city remained a center of trade, but Rome controlled critical Mediterranean routes and imposed restrictions that limited Carthage's influence. Mining operations in Iberia were lost, cutting off precious metals that had fueled the city's wealth. Carthage's population remained large and culturally rich, but its economic power was increasingly overshadowed by Rome's expanding influence. The city that had once dictated terms across the Western Mediterranean was now forced to operate within boundaries set by a former rival. Yet, the decline of Carthage was not immediate, and it was not total. The city retained enough wealth, organization, and ambition to continue as a regional power. Leaders like Hasdrubal the Fair attempted to rebuild Carthage's influence diplomatically and economically, forging alliances with tribes in Africa and Spain and maintaining the remnants of the city's commercial empire. Carthage survived as a cultural and economic hub, proving that decline was a process, not an event. However, Rome's vigilance ensured that Carthage could never regain its former military power. Every attempt at rebuilding armies or fleets was closely monitored. Carthage's ability to act independently was permanently curtailed. Its expansionist dreams, once fueled by wealth and audacity, were replaced by a careful defensive strategy. The city's narrative shifted from empire building to survival, from bold ambition to cautious pragmatism. The decline also carried a symbolic weight. Carthage had once represented the power of trade, ingenuity, and maritime dominance. It had challenged Rome, humiliated armies, and produced generals whose brilliance inspired fear across continents. After Zama, that symbolism was inverted. Carthage became a cautionary tale. Even the wealthiest, most strategic, and most ambitious civilizations could be humbled by a combination of resilience, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of power by rivals. Despite the constraints, Carthage's culture endured. Its people continued to honor their gods, maintain temples, and engage in the arts and commerce that had defined the city for centuries. Phoenician language, religion, and traditions survived alongside local African and Mediterranean influences. Carthage remained vibrant, even as its ability to project power diminished. It was a city of memory and legacy, holding on to the glories of its past while constrained by the realities of its present. Yet the city's decline was inexorable. Rome's dominance continued to grow, expanding across the Mediterranean with political acumen and military might. Carthage's diminished role created tensions, both internal and external, that would eventually culminate in the Third Punic War. The city that had once terrified Rome now faced the possibility of total annihilation, a fate that would come nearly a century later. Carthage's decline after Zama is a story of resilience, adaptation, and tragic limitations. It was a city that survived defeat yet could not fully recover its former glory. Its identity shifted from empire to client state, from independent power to subordinate observer. And yet, the legacy of Carthage, its audacity, its ingenuity, and its ability to challenge even the mightiest empire, remained, echoing across history as a testament to what had once been. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE, Carthage had survived its catastrophic defeat at Zama, endured the imposition of Roman treaties, and adapted to life under the shadow of a growing Mia. Yet its very survival was a constant source of unease for Rome, the city that had once dominated the Western Mediterranean, the city that had produced Hannibal and Hamilcar, still thrived economically. It remained wealthy, strategically located, and capable of mobilizing resources. To Rome, Carthage's existence was a threat, a reminder of a rival that had once challenged the Republic's supremacy and humiliated its armies. Tensions simmered for decades. After the Second Punic War, Carthage's military capabilities were severely restricted by Rome, yet its economic power continued to grow. Trade flourished in North Africa, metals from Iberia enriched its coffers, and its harbors remained bustling hubs of commerce. Rome watched with suspicion. Every ship, every merchant, every alliance was scrutinized. Carthage, proud and defiant despite its limitations, remained a symbol of what Rome feared most, a potential resurgence. The spark for the Third Punic War came in 149 BCE, triggered by a combination of Roman paranoia and Carthaginian defiance. Numidia, a neighboring kingdom and Roman ally, began encroaching on Carthaginian territory. Carthage, in an attempt to defend itself, mobilized forces without Roman approval, a direct violation of its treaties. Rome seized the opportunity to declare war, framing the conflict as a moral obligation to punish a city that had once dared to rise against them. Yet, the deeper motivation was clear. Rome intended to eliminate Carthage permanently. Carthage, aware of the stakes, prepared for a siege unlike any it had faced. Its walls, reinforced over decades, were formidable, and its population, trained by centuries of maritime and military discipline, was ready to endure hardship. The city stockpiled grain, weapons and supplies, bracing for what would become a protracted struggle. Citizens from every corner of Carthage, merchants, artisans, farmers and soldiers, took part in the defense. The city's leaders, aware that survival itself was at risk, inspired their people with a mixture of courage, resilience, and determination. Rome responded with overwhelming force. The Roman Senate dispatched one of the largest armies it had ever assembled, supported by a fleet designed to cut off Carthage from trade and reinforcements. The siege began in 149 BCE, and the city was encircled. Hannibal was long gone, having died in exile, but Carthage still relied on its military tradition, disciplined citizens, and clever tactics to resist the Roman onslaught. Skirmishes, sorties, and defensive maneuvers prolonged the siege, frustrating the Romans who had expected a swift victory. For 3 years, Carthage held out. The city became a fortress under constant bombardment. Streets were turned into battlegrounds, and every building became a defensive position. Citizens fought alongside soldiers, and Carthage's famed ingenuity was on full display. Ingenious tactics were employed to repel attacks, including countermining operations and defensive traps. Yet Rome's persistence, sheer numbers, and methodical strategy gradually wore down the defenders. Carthage's wealth could not replace the manpower lost in street-to-street combat, nor could ingenuity overcome the relentless pressure of the Roman war machine. By 146 BCE, the situation had become dire. Rome tightened the siege, cutting off food supplies and bombarding the city with artillery and siege engines. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion decimated Carthage's population. The once thriving metropolis, known for its wealth, culture, and cosmopolitanism, became a city under siege in the most literal sense. Yet even in these final months, the defenders resisted fiercely. Stories of heroism, sacrifice, and determination emerged, men and women fighting to the last, refusing to surrender to a power that had long sought their destruction. The final assault came in the summer of 146 BCE. Roman forces breached the walls after intense combat, and the city fell into chaos. Houses were set ablaze, streets ran with blood, and the population was decimated. Rome's intent was total destruction. Carthage was to be erased, not merely defeated. Historical accounts describe the systematic dismantling of the city. Survivors were killed or sold into slavery, treasures were plundered, and what remained of Carthage's infrastructure was destroyed. The once great city that had dominated the Western Mediterranean for centuries was reduced to rubble. Rome even went so far as to reportedly plough the ruins of Carthage and salt the earth, a symbolic act meant to ensure that nothing could rise again. Whether the salting of the earth is factual or myth, the symbolism remains powerful, the complete erasure of a civilization that had dared to challenge Rome's supremacy. Carthage's defeat was absolute. Its navy, its armies, its trade networks, and its culture were dismantled. The Mediterranean, once a contested space between two ambitious civilizations, now belonged to Rome without question. Yet, the story of Carthage did not end entirely with its destruction. The legacy of the city endured through its influence on culture, trade, and history. Roman accounts, while often biased, preserved the memory of Hannibal, Hamilcar, and the city's ingenuity. Carthaginian innovations in naval architecture, commerce, and strategy influenced future Mediterranean powers. The memory of Carthage became a lesson in both ambition and caution, a reminder of the rise and fall of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The Third Punic War stands as a testament to the brutality of ancient conflict, the consequences of rivalry, and the ultimate dominance of Rome. It demonstrates the fragility of even the wealthiest, most strategically located cities when faced with a relentless and patient adversary. Carthage, a city that had risen from refugee Phoenicians to a global power, met its end not through a single defeat, but through decades of sustained pressure, strategic limitation, and finally total annihilation. In the ashes of Carthage, history finds both tragedy and a lesson. A civilization that embodied ambition, ingenuity, and resilience was destroyed by the combination of a determined enemy, strategic miscalculations, and the inexorable rise of a rival that refused to forgive past humiliations. Carthage's destruction marked the end of one era and the unchallenged dominance of another. The story of this great city, however, continues to resonate, inspiring generations to study its brilliance, its resilience, and the extraordinary individuals who shaped its destiny. Carthage was not just a city of war and conquest. It was a vibrant civilization defined by commerce, religion, and the rhythms of daily life. Its streets, markets, and temples reflected centuries of Phoenician heritage, combined with influences from North Africa, Greece, and even Etruscan culture. Understanding Carthaginian culture is essential to appreciating why the city thrived for centuries and why its destruction by Rome resonated so profoundly in history. Trade was the lifeblood of Carthage. From its earliest days, the city leveraged its prime location on the North African coast to become a hub for commerce across the Mediterranean. Carthaginian merchants traveled to Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, and beyond, exchanging olive oil, wine, pottery, textiles, and the famous Tyrian purple dye for metals, grain, and luxury goods. Ports were bustling centers of activity, with ships constantly arriving and departing, carrying the wealth of 3 continents. The city's economic power was unmatched, and its merchants were not merely traders, they were innovators, negotiators, and strategists, skilled in the art of maritime commerce. Carthaginian society was hierarchical, yet meritocratic in many ways. At the top were the wealthy merchant elite, who controlled trade networks and wielded political influence. They invested in shipbuilding, mining, and the production of goods that fueled both local prosperity and overseas commerce. Beneath them were artisans, laborers, and farmers, whose work sustained the city's economy. Mercenaries, often from Iberia or Africa, formed the backbone of Carthage's military. Citizens took pride not only in wealth, but in service to the city, whether through trade, craftsmanship, or defense. Social mobility was possible through success in commerce or military service, giving Carthaginians a dynamic society where ambition could be rewarded. Religion played a central role in daily life. Carthage inherited the pantheon of the Phoenicians, worshipping gods such as Baal-Hamon, the chief deity associated with fertility and growth, and Tanit, the mother goddess and protector of the city. Temples dominated the skyline, often richly decorated and strategically located near marketplaces and harbors. Religious rituals were integrated into public and private life, from festivals and sacrifices to prayers for safe voyages and prosperous trade. The Carthaginians believed that divine favor was essential for the city's survival and prosperity, and they invested considerable effort and resources into maintaining their religious obligations. Some aspects of Carthaginian religion remain controversial and have fascinated historians for centuries. Accounts, largely from Roman and Greek sources, suggest that child sacrifices were performed in extreme situations, often during times of war or crisis. While the full scale and frequency of these rituals are debated, they illustrate the seriousness with which Carthaginians approached divine appeasement. Religion was not merely spiritual, it was a tool of civic cohesion and a reflection of the city's values, emphasizing sacrifice, duty, and communal survival. Daily life in Carthage was bustling, organized, and diverse. Streets were lined with workshops, markets, and residential areas. Artisans produced pottery, metalwork, textiles, and luxury goods that were exported across the Mediterranean. Food markets overflowed with grains, fruits, seafood, and livestock. Citizens and merchants gathered in public spaces to discuss business, politics, or social matters. Education, although limited to the elite, focused on literacy, trade skills, and sometimes military training. Children of wealthy families were often taught navigation, mathematics, and foreign languages to prepare them for careers in commerce or governance. Carthaginian architecture reflected both functionality and aesthetic vision. Harbors were engineered to maximize trade efficiency, with quays, warehouses, and shipyards carefully planned. Temples and public buildings displayed a mix of Phoenician and local African styles, using stone, bronze, and wood to create structures that were both durable and visually striking. Residential areas varied, from modest homes of laborers to lavish villas of the merchant elite, often decorated with mosaics, frescoes, and courtyards. The city's layout emphasized commerce, defense, and social interaction, reflecting a civilization that valued organization, beauty, and practicality. Carthage was also culturally diverse. The city attracted merchants, artisans, and immigrants from across the Mediterranean. Greeks, Etruscans, Egyptians, and various African tribes contributed to its cosmopolitan character. Languages, customs, and culinary traditions mingled, creating a dynamic urban culture. Festivals and public events celebrated both local traditions and imported influences, reinforcing social cohesion while highlighting the city's openness to innovation and exchange. Despite its cosmopolitan nature, Carthage maintained a strong sense of identity, rooted in its Phoenician heritage. Maritime prowess, strategic thinking, and commercial acumen were celebrated as civic virtues. Citizens were aware that the city's wealth and survival depended on discipline, organization, and foresight. Trade, religion, and daily life were interwoven with this collective consciousness, creating a culture that prized both prosperity and resilience. Education, mentorship, and apprenticeship were key to maintaining Carthage's economic and military edge. Young men often trained under experienced merchants, artisans, or military leaders. Naval skills were passed down through generations, ensuring that the city's fleets remained highly skilled and capable of long-distance trade or warfare. Knowledge of navigation, shipbuilding, and commerce was considered essential for Carthage's continued success, and families invested heavily in passing this knowledge to the next generation. Despite centuries of achievement, Carthage's culture was not immune to tension or conflict. Rivalries between merchant families, disputes over trade routes, and occasional uprisings by mercenaries or subjugated tribes tested the city's stability. Yet Carthage's ability to absorb these challenges, maintain cohesion, and adapt to changing circumstances reflected the resilience and ingenuity that had allowed it to rise from a Phoenician settlement to a Mediterranean powerhouse. Carthaginian culture, therefore, cannot be reduced to its military or economic accomplishments alone. It was a civilization of visionaries, traders, priests, artisans, and citizens who understood that survival required intelligence, skill, and a sense of shared purpose. Religion, commerce, architecture, and daily life intertwined to create a society that for centuries shaped the Mediterranean world and inspired both admiration and fear among its neighbors. Carthage's reputation as a military power was built not only on ambition and strategy, but also on innovation. Unlike Rome, which relied primarily on disciplined citizen legions, Carthage approached warfare with creativity, adaptability, and a deep understanding of the advantages offered by geography, technology, and diverse human resources. Its armies, fleets, and tactics reflected centuries of experimentation, blending Phoenician ingenuity with lessons learned across Africa, Iberia, and the Mediterranean. Perhaps the most famous symbol of Carthaginian military innovation was the war elephant. Imported from North Africa and occasionally from India, elephants were not mere beasts of burden, they were living engines of war. Towering over men and horses, armored and driven by experienced mahots, these creatures struck terror into enemy formations. Their sheer size and unpredictability could disrupt even the most disciplined legions, forcing opponents to scatter or retreat. Elephants were often used to lead charges, break defensive lines, and create chaos before infantry and cavalry swept in to exploit weaknesses. Hannibal's use of elephants during the crossing of the Alps and subsequent campaigns in Italy remains one of the most audacious and legendary applications of this strategy in military history. Yet elephants presented challenges. They were difficult to control, required substantial food and care, and could panic under stress, sometimes turning on friendly troops. Carthage's ability to train, deploy, and maintain these animals reflected advanced logistical planning and the city's commitment to leveraging every advantage. War elephants were more than a weapon. They were a statement, a psychological tool signaling Carthage's strength, creativity, and willingness to harness nature in the service of strategy. Naval power was another cornerstone of Carthaginian innovation. From its earliest days, the city understood that the Mediterranean was both a highway and a battlefield. Carthaginian shipyards churned out vessels designed for speed, maneuverability, and combat efficiency. Cuenqueras, long and agile warships with multiple rows of oars, became the backbone of the fleet. Carthaginian naval engineers introduced innovations in hull design, ramming techniques, and boarding strategies that allowed their ships to dominate trade routes and challenge rivals. Their expertise in maritime navigation, combined with a disciplined naval corps, ensured that Carthage controlled key shipping lanes, enforced trade monopolies, and projected power across the western Mediterranean. Carthage's navies were not just instruments of war. They were an extension of commerce. Merchant vessels and warships were often interlinked, allowing the city to defend trade routes while maintaining economic growth. Carthaginian commanders understood the interplay between economics and military strategy. Controlling the sea meant controlling wealth, influence, and diplomacy. This maritime doctrine allowed Carthage to challenge Greece, Rome, and local North African tribes simultaneously, leveraging its ships to achieve both economic and strategic dominance. Carthage's armies were another source of innovation. Unlike Rome's citizen legions, Carthaginian forces relied heavily on mercenaries drawn from across Africa, Iberia, and the eastern Mediterranean. This created a military that was diverse, adaptable, and highly specialized. Iberian warriors were known for their fierce infantry skills, Numidian cavalry excelled at hit-and-run tactics, and African soldiers brought discipline and knowledge of local terrain. By combining these elements, Carthage could assemble armies tailored to specific campaigns, exploiting the strengths of each group while mitigating weaknesses. Hannibal's campaigns in Italy exemplified this approach, as he integrated diverse troops into a cohesive fighting force capable of defeating Rome repeatedly. Training, discipline, and leadership were critical to Carthaginian military success. Mercenaries were not left to act independently. Commanders like Hamilcar and Hannibal instilled rigorous drills, coordinated maneuvers, and strict adherence to strategy. Communication and coordination were emphasized, particularly in multi-ethnic armies where language and custom could create confusion. Carthage excelled at turning a mosaic of mercenaries into a unified and lethal force, a feat that Rome struggled to counter for years. Carthaginian military strategy also emphasized adaptability and psychological warfare. Rather than relying solely on brute force, commanders studied terrain, enemy behavior, and timing. Hannibal's famous encirclement at Cannae demonstrated a deep understanding of both human psychology and battlefield geometry. Similarly, Carthage's use of ambushes, deception, and surprise attacks across Iberia and Italy showcased the city's strategic sophistication. Every battle was an opportunity not only to destroy the enemy, but to destabilize their morale, disrupt alliances, and manipulate perceptions. Logistics were another area where Carthage innovated. Maintaining armies across long distances required secure supply lines, local alliances, and careful planning. The transportation of elephants, movement of ships, and provisioning of multi-ethnic armies reflected advanced organizational skills. Carthaginian commanders understood that battles were won long before engagement, in the careful orchestration of resources, intelligence, and strategic positioning. Despite these innovations, Carthage's military system had vulnerabilities. Reliance on mercenaries meant loyalty could be unpredictable, as evidenced by the mercenary war after the First Punic War. Political decisions in Carthage sometimes limited strategic choices, as mercenary pay, elite priorities, and civic oversight constrained battlefield flexibility. Yet, even with these challenges, Carthage remained a formidable military power for centuries, capable of challenging the might of Rome and other Mediterranean civilizations. Carthaginian military innovations left a lasting legacy. Elephants inspired fear and tactical experimentation across cultures. Naval design and strategy influenced both Roman and later Mediterranean fleets. The integration of diverse troops into cohesive armies became a model for multinational military forces. Hannibal's campaigns, in particular, served as a blueprint for strategic brilliance, teaching lessons about logistics, psychology, and the art of war that endure to this day. In sum, Carthage was more than a city of merchants. It was a city of strategists, engineers, and innovators. Its approach to war reflected intelligence, creativity, and adaptation. From elephants that struck terror into enemy hearts, to fleets that controlled trade, and armies that integrated diverse skills, Carthaginian military prowess was both practical and symbolic. It demonstrated that a civilization could thrive not just through wealth, but through innovation, vision, and the courage to challenge the most powerful adversaries in the ancient world. Though Carthage was ultimately destroyed in 146 BCE, its influence on Rome and the broader Mediterranean world endured for centuries. The city's legacy was not limited to tales of defeat or military confrontation. Instead, Carthage left a mark on trade, strategy, culture, and urban development elements that would shape Rome, and through Rome, the future of the entire Western world. Understanding Carthage's legacy is essential to recognizing the depth of its contribution to history and why Rome, even as it obliterated the city, could not erase its influence. One of the most profound areas of influence was commerce. Carthage's mastery of trade set a benchmark that Rome would eventually emulate and surpass. Carthaginian merchants had established complex networks across the Mediterranean, Iberia, and North Africa. They innovated in maritime logistics, market integration, and commodity exchange, creating a system where wealth flowed efficiently between continents. Rome, initially more focused on land-based conquest and citizen legions, observed and eventually adopted elements of Carthaginian economic strategy. Roman trade, particularly in North Africa, Sicily, and Spain, mirrored the organizational and logistical sophistication first pioneered by Carthage. Roads, ports, and supply chains that would become hallmarks of the Roman Empire were, in part, inspired by the commercial infrastructure Carthage had developed centuries earlier. Carthage's military innovations also left a lasting mark on Rome. Hannibal's campaigns in Italy had forced Rome to rethink strategy, adapt tactics, and reorganize its legions. The concept of strategic flexibility, integration of diverse troop types, and understanding of terrain became central to Roman military doctrine. Roman generals studied Hannibal's maneuvers, particularly at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, learning lessons in both brilliance and the limits of audacity. War elephants, while rarely used by Rome, left a psychological and tactical legacy. The discipline required to counter Hannibal's armies informed Roman training and battlefield preparation for generations, ensuring that Carthaginian ingenuity was not lost even in defeat. Carthage also influenced urban planning and architecture. The city's harbors, warehouses, fortifications, and street layouts demonstrated a level of sophistication that few contemporary cities could match. Rome and other Mediterranean powers observed Carthage's ability to integrate commerce, defense, and civic life into a single urban framework. The emphasis on strategic harbors, market districts, and fortified walls would later be reflected in Roman cities throughout the empire, from Ostia to Alexandria. Carthage demonstrated that urban design could enhance both economic power and military security, a lesson that Rome absorbed and applied extensively. The cultural and religious impact of Carthage extended beyond the city's destruction. Phoenician traditions, worship practices, and artistic techniques influenced North Africa and Mediterranean civilizations for generations. Even as Rome sought to eradicate Carthaginian political power, it could not fully erase the memory of its religious festivals, craftsmanship, and cultural motifs. Carthage's cosmopolitan character, blending Phoenician, African, Iberian, and Greek influences, offered a model of urban diversity and multicultural interaction that later Mediterranean cities would emulate. The city's emphasis on literacy, record-keeping, and education in commerce created a framework for administrative sophistication that informed Roman bureaucracy. Carthage's rivalry with Rome also created a strategic and psychological legacy. By challenging Rome repeatedly, Carthage forced the Republic to grow stronger, more disciplined, and more resilient. Rome's response to Hannibal's campaigns, the adaptation of military tactics, political maneuvering, and long-term strategic planning, shaped the empire's approach to governance and warfare. Carthage, even in defeat, acted as a catalyst for Rome's transformation from a regional power into a Mediterranean superpower. The memory of Carthaginian audacity became a standard against which Rome measured its own military and political achievements. Trade networks initiated by Carthage left an enduring economic imprint. Carthaginian colonies in Sicily, Sardinia, and Iberia had established routes for silver, copper, and other resources that Rome later exploited. The integration of these trade routes into Roman economic systems helped the Republic, and eventually the Empire, consolidate wealth, secure resources, and project influence across the Mediterranean. Carthage's vision of linking multiple continents through commerce became a template for Rome's economic expansion, demonstrating the long-term value of Carthaginian innovation. Carthage's legacy of resilience and ambition also inspired leaders and thinkers long after its destruction. Hannibal's campaigns became legendary examples of courage, strategic brilliance, and audacity in the face of overwhelming odds. Military theorists, historians, and later generals Napoleon, for instance, studied Hannibal as a model of tactical genius. The story of Carthage's rise, endurance, and ultimate fall served as both cautionary tale and inspiration, illustrating the thin line between ambition and vulnerability in the face of determined rivals. Even in Rome's cultural narrative, Carthage retained symbolic significance. Roman literature, historiography, and rhetoric frequently referenced Carthage as the quintessential adversary. Authors like Livy immortalized the Punic Wars, Hannibal's victories, and the ultimate destruction of the city as defining moments in Rome's moral, military, and civic development. Carthage became a lens through which Rome measured courage, strategy, and the consequences of hubris. In shaping Roman identity, Carthage's memory contributed to the Republic's sense of destiny, its understanding of warfare, and its approach to empire building. Carthage's influence extended into North Africa long after its destruction. Roman settlers repurposed the city's harbors, roads, and agricultural systems, but the underlying organization and infrastructure bore Carthaginian roots. The techniques of irrigation, land management, and trade networks established by Carthage endured, feeding local economies and supporting urban growth. In many ways, Carthage's practical innovations became part of the foundation upon which Rome built its African provinces. Ultimately, Carthage's legacy is a story of enduring impact despite annihilation. The city may have been destroyed physically, but its contributions to trade, military strategy, urban design, and culture persisted. Rome's dominance, in fact, was shaped in response to Carthaginian challenge. Without Carthage, Rome may never have developed the adaptability, innovation, and resilience that defined its centuries-long empire. The city that rose from Phoenician refugees to a Mediterranean powerhouse left a mark that outlived its destruction, proving that even in defeat, civilization can influence the course of history in ways no conqueror can fully erase. Carthage teaches a powerful lesson. Greatness is measured not only by survival, but by the enduring influence a civilization leaves behind. Its innovations in trade, warfare, and culture became the foundation for Rome's rise and inspired future generations across the Mediterranean. Carthage's legacy is a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the capacity to shape the world, even when the world ultimately conquers you. For centuries, the city of Carthage existed in memory, in myths, and in the records of Rome. Its destruction in 146 BCE was so thorough that, for a time, it seemed the city had vanished completely. Yet, the story of Carthage refused to die. Centuries later, archaeologists, historians, and scholars began to uncover the physical traces, cultural imprints, and legends that kept the city alive in the imagination. Rediscovering Carthage is not just a story of excavation, it is a story of bridging the gap between myth and history, between a vanished civilization and the modern world. The first sparks of rediscovery began in the medieval period, when chroniclers and travelers documented ruins along the North African coast. Classical sources such as Polybius, Livy, and Appian provided tantalizing accounts of Carthage's wealth, trade, and wars, but these were filtered through the lens of Rome, often exaggerating Carthage's brutality or emphasizing Roman triumph. These early accounts created a dual image: Carthage as both a marvel of civilization and a moral cautionary tale. Myths of child sacrifice, Hannibal's audacity, and Dido's tragic love story fused with historical reality, shaping popular imagination for centuries. Modern archaeological exploration began in earnest during the 19th century, when European scholars, driven by fascination with antiquity, sought to locate and study the remains of the fabled city. Excavations revealed remnants of harbors, warehouses, temples, and residential districts, confirming that Carthage had been far more sophisticated than Roman propaganda suggested. Substantial discoveries at Bursa Hill, the religious heart of the city, uncovered monumental structures, defensive walls, and artifacts that revealed the complexity of Carthaginian urban planning. These findings provided tangible evidence of Carthage's economic power, political organization, and architectural expertise. One of the most striking revelations from archaeology was the city's extensive harbor system, which demonstrated Carthage's dominance of maritime trade. Scholars uncovered dual harbors, one for military ships and another for commercial vessels, engineered with such sophistication that historians marveled at the Carthaginians' ability to manage logistics on a massive scale. Warehouses lined the quays, capable of storing grain, metals, and luxury goods, while roads connected the ports to inland markets. The scale and precision of Carthage's maritime infrastructure rivaled anything in contemporary Greece or Italy, highlighting the city's role as the central hub of Western Mediterranean commerce. Religious sites and artifacts revealed a culture deeply intertwined with spirituality and civic life. Temples to Baal Hammon and Tanit, often accompanied by altars, votive offerings, and inscriptions, provided insights into Carthaginian devotion and ritual practice. While some sources emphasized child sacrifice, modern scholarship suggests these accounts were often exaggerated or misinterpreted, possibly to justify Roman conquest. The evidence shows a society that invested heavily in religious life, using ceremonies to reinforce social cohesion, honor deities, and sanctify civic responsibilities. Carthaginian religion was both personal and political, a reflection of a civilization that resurged the power of belief in sustaining a complex society. Archaeologists also unearthed artifacts of daily life, pottery, jewelry, tools and coins that painted a picture of a bustling, cosmopolitan city. Coins bore inscriptions in Punic script, showcasing Carthage's linguistic heritage and economic sophistication. Pottery and luxury goods displayed both Phoenician traditions and influences from across the Mediterranean, illustrating the city's role as a cultural crossroads. These artifacts confirmed that Carthage was not merely a military power or a tragic tale of ambition, but a civilization with rich social, economic, and artistic dimensions. Carthage's myths continued to shape modern interpretations. The legend of Dido, immortalized in Virgil's Aeneid, captured imaginations for centuries, blending history with epic romance and tragedy. While Dido's story is mythologized, it reflects real elements of Carthaginian identity: the experience of founding a city in exile, the determination to build prosperity from nothing, and the tensions between personal ambition and communal responsibility. Such myths, while not strictly factual, preserve the human dimension of Carthage, reminding us that behind the ruins and artifacts were real people with dreams, fears, and aspirations. Modern scholarship has sought to reconcile myth with material evidence. Researchers have emphasized Carthage's achievements in trade, urban design, and military innovation, challenging older narratives that portrayed the city as solely decadent, cruel, or doomed. The rediscovery of Carthage offers a more nuanced understanding, a civilization capable of extraordinary feats, resilient in the face of adversity, and influential even after its destruction. By examining both archaeological evidence and historical texts, scholars have reconstructed a fuller picture of Carthage's economic networks, social organization, and cultural richness. The city's strategic location also continues to captivate historians. Carthage sat at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and the Mediterranean, its harbors offering access to grain, metals, and trade networks that spanned continents. Archaeological studies of ports, roads, and storage facilities confirm that Carthage was not a passive trading city, but a master of logistics, maritime engineering, and commercial diplomacy. Its influence extended far beyond its walls, affecting regional economies, political alliances, and military conflicts for centuries. Rediscovering Carthage also challenges modern perceptions of ancient history. The narrative of total destruction, long perpetuated by Roman sources, gave way to recognition of the city's enduring influence. Scholars now view Carthage not just as a defeated rival, but as a model of innovation, adaptability, and cosmopolitanism. Its story offers lessons in urban planning, maritime trade, military strategy, and cultural synthesis, demonstrating that even a civilization obliterated by conquest can leave a lasting imprint on the world. Today, Carthage is both an archaeological site and a symbol. Excavations continue to reveal new insights, while the city's mythic past inspires literature, film, and scholarship. Visitors walk among the ruins of Bursa Hill, imagining the bustling harbors, vibrant markets, and proud citizens who once inhabited the city. Carthage's story of rise, resilience, conflict, and ultimate destruction serves as a bridge between history and legend, reminding us that civilizations are remembered not only through what survives physically, but through the ideas, achievements, and lessons they leave behind. Rediscovering Carthage is, ultimately, an act of connection. It links modern observers to a world of ambition, innovation, and human endeavor. The myths, The ruins and the artifacts collectively tell a story of a city that dared to challenge the greatest powers of its time, shaped the Mediterranean, and left an enduring legacy in the annals of human history. Even in rubble, Carthage speaks of courage, ingenuity, and the enduring impact of a civilization that, though destroyed, continues to inspire and teach.